Good afternoon. My name is Mark Goodman. I represent Score Chicago. You're watching a live interactive call-in TV here on CANTV 21. This is our last show in this studio, our last show of the season. As you could see by the sign that was put up before the show came on, the CANTV studio is moving, so you're not going to see us until probably next year. So we're going to be talking with Michael Rosen. Michael here is my guest, and we're going to be talking about international business. Michael is a very experienced international business person, having lived around the world, and we'll talk about that. Gene here is on the phone if you do have a question relative to doing business internationally, or if you're an international person about doing business in the U.S., we'll talk about it. I'm going to do a little bit here relative to bookkeeping. It's July 23rd, and I'm Mark Goodman, and my guest is Michael Rosen. A little bit on Score, who is taking care of us here. Why do people come to Score? They come to Score because they want to start or buy a business. We help people with the SBA, people with strategic issues on how they're running their business, and help people market their business on the internet. Well, Michael, you're our last guest here in this studio. We're going to be asking you about international business. Michael is fluent in Spanish and Portuguese, so if you have a question you want to ask in Spanish and Portuguese, you'll have to talk to Gene in English, but then you can talk to Michael in Spanish if you wish to. Anyhow, so we're talking about international business. People from outside the U.S. doing business here, people from here doing business to the outside. So, Michael, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became interested in international business.
Great. Well, I would have to say, Mark, that genetically, I'm an internationalist almost from birth because my paternal grandfather lived and worked in Japan, China, and Venezuela for many, many years. And growing up, my father took us to live in Europe, UK and Italy for a time period. And then right out of college, and in fact, during college, I spent a number of years living in Latin America. And then finally, my career has taken me through living in 9 countries over the last 40 years or so, and working in more than 60 countries.
Well, I heard a presentation from Michael once, and he said he began his business selling drugs in Colombia.
Yes, so right out of college, my first job, actually, as you said correctly, was selling drugs in Colombia. I got a job with a pharmaceutical company called Pfizer, which was not the large behemoth that it is today. At that point, Pfizer had not yet cracked its first $1 billion in sales, and I was hired as a pharmaceutical sales rep as a local employee in Bogota, Colombia. So yes, I literally did sell drugs in Colombia. I was the only American pharmaceutical sales rep at that time, and it was an interesting challenge, and it was a lot of fun. And I got my feet wet first in international business. From that perspective.
So, Michael, what are the biggest challenges that companies in the U.S. have when it comes to doing business offshore?
So there are a number of challenges. First challenge probably is language and culture. The U.S. is such a large country geographically, number of people, so we assume automatically that everyone speaks English. Which is not the case. Although English is the number one business language, probably Chinese and Mandarin, particularly, and Hindi are the largest languages spoken around the world. And certainly Spanish, you have over 400 million people speaking Spanish. Brazil speaks Portuguese, so there's more than 200 million people there. So language is clearly one issue. Second big issue, culture. Culture is in each country totally different, and it takes a while to understand the culture, both the local business culture as well as the culture of that country. So those are issues. A third issue would be the role of time. In the United States, we look at time in a very different way than overseas. And what can happen in another country may take far longer than we would normally expect in the United States.
So what might be an example of a time dissonance in a business venture that you could imagine somebody working on?
Great question. So in the United States, we are geared to quarterly stock results in the stock market. That's a U.S. phenomena. I would say that phenomena barely exists outside of the United States. So usually investors in other countries are looking at much longer term results rather than the typical quarterly result. They look at yearly results, 3-year results, 5-year results.
So if I had a distributor in another country and I was chasing after them for closing sales every quarter, they may look at me and say, like, what's the big deal?
Yeah, they would be saying, clearly we want to see what's happening in the quarter, but we have a year's target and there's still time to catch up. But there's a fourth element I didn't mention that is critical for doing business overseas. In the United States, everything is based on a transaction. We are very transaction oriented. Overseas, it's about the personal relationship that you've established with either your customer, your distributor, whoever is representing you. If you don't have that personal relationship, you're fried. So if you don't have it, you really can't do business. And it takes time to develop that personal relationship. That personal relationship means credibility, trust, etc. In the United States, it's all about the transaction. The relationship follows later. Overseas, it's about the relationship first and then the transaction.
So if you are looking to business outside the U.S., you may start with your product and basically say you have a great product and people should just buy your product because it's a great product. But there are countries, before anybody's going to buy your product, the first thing they're going to want to get a sense is, I want to know about you.
They not only are going to want to know about you, they want you to understand about them. Okay. And ideally, in any given country, there you have a go-between that knows you, knows that other company, and helps bring you together from a trust perspective. That go-between usually conveys the trust from one group of people to another group of people, and hopefully that begins to cement a little bit of a deal, or at least a relationship.
Okay, so I might be leaping forward here to the next question, but I want to build on the go-between comment here. So I want to do business in another country, and you're telling me I should have a go-between.
Yes.
How do I find a go-between?
Great question. So in each culture, it's different. In China, that go-between is called, or that connecting point is called guanxi. And your value in China is your connections, or your guanxi. So you have to clearly in China find that guanxi. In other countries, they have a similar term in each country. Now, the key question is, how do you find the right connection for what you want to do? So first of all, there are various organizations that might help you. If you don't know in your own city where you're starting somebody from that culture that can help you, an obvious way to do this is via, first, believe it or not, the U.S. Commerce Department. U.S. Commerce Department has offices, particularly here in Chicago, with specialists on Latin America, and within Latin America, specialists on particular countries, and they can help you at least through the U.S. Embassy in each country. They have a counterpart, the U.S. Commerce person in that country, and they can provide for you research and people that might connect you within your industry to the right industry.
Michael has a chart with a couple of resources, but I wanted to get to a question that Michael wanted to make sure that we asked. So, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Ahead.
So the second component would be the American Chamber of Commerce. So we have the American Chamber of Commerce in Washington, D.C., but in each country there is an American plus the country Chamber of Commerce that's a great source of commercial relationships within that country. So in Brazil would be the American Brazil Chamber of Commerce. Within Spain, it would be the Spain Chamber of Commerce.
Do I need to go to Brazil to find the American Brazil Chamber?
Yes, there's a website, and you can find the organization, and they have people that are bilingual.
Right, but sometimes the American Brazil or the American Chinese Chamber has like an office in Chicago.
No, that would be the reverse.
Okay.
That country may have established a Chamber of Commerce in Chicago. So today we have actually about 60 bilateral international chambers of commerce in Chicago. So the American Israel Chamber of Commerce, has an office here in Chicago. The Polish American Chamber of Commerce has a chamber here.
So I could go to that chamber office now. To some degree, that chamber office is primarily to help, say, Polish companies.
Correct.
In the U.S.
Polish companies wanting to come into the U.S.
Right,
exactly.
but they would certainly also be knowledgeable about going potentially the other way.
Correct.
All right.
One of the largest chambers here, for instance, is the German American Chamber of Commerce.
I think a lot of people don't realize how Chicago is probably one of the top markets for German companies to locate to. So let me ask you a question.
Yeah, there are actually over 240 German companies in Illinois.
Good. So what are the steps that you would recommend to a company who's looking to expand offshore?
So we're talking now, just for clarification, an American company, a company in Chicago or Illinois that wants to expand outside the United States. Okay. So there's two ways of looking at it. The first and foremost, I think you've got to look at what are the markets for your products around the globe. Now, an example. A global business is pharmaceuticals, drugs, but a subdivision of that is drugs for pets.
Okay.
Well, it turns out if you do look at the analysis that's available by websites, the U.S. is the largest pet veterinary drug market in the world. The next one after that, believe it or not, is Brazil.
Okay.
There's something like 60 million dogs in Brazil and 40 million cats. So it makes it a substantial market. So that kind of analysis you would want to do for your product line, first and foremost, to see a prioritization of which are the top markets for your type of product.
So if I had a pet product and I wanted to sell it someplace other than the U.S., Brazil might be a good place to start.
Brazil might be a great place.
Okay. So you actually had a chart, and I'm going to put it up here because I think that it's worth looking at here. So Michael had a set of resources here, and let's put it up. So if you just wanted to start out to look at some countries, here's some key websites. The CIA actually has a fact book for you, and the World Bank has one, and Transparency is World Corruption.
So let me just explain a little of each of these. So the CIA website, believe it or not, has profiles 176 countries. It profiles everything from geography, religion, economics, you name it. And it's a great source of information. I've used it in my executive MBA classes frequently and encourage my students to use that.
All right, so let's go to the next one, the doingbusiness.org.
So doingbusiness.org is put out by the World Bank, and it's an analysis of, again, 170 plus countries, and it ranks them on the ease of doing business or the difficulty. Now, you'd think that the U.S. would be number one in that, and actually the U.S. is not. The U.S. today ranks probably fourth or fifth in that analysis. The easiest country to do business in globally today is probably Singapore, then New Zealand. U.S. is further down. But it ranks this ranking that they do is ease of doing business, ease of starting up a business, ease of closing down a business, which is another issue if your business doesn't make it. And so I would encourage you to look at the rankings for the country that you want to go into.
Okay, so your third one is the Transparency, the World Corruption Index. Why do I want to worry about corruption?
So we obviously, we don't think that there's corruption outside of, the United States. The U.S., obviously, coming from the state of Illinois, where we've had corruption. This particular website ranks around the world, again, more than 100 countries on the degree of corruption. And corruption is an impediment to business. So one certainly would want to, when one does the prioritization of key markets by market for your product, after that you want to screen by things like corruption and ease of doing business to figure out, does that change the prioritization of what country I'm going to go into?
And your last one here was the Global Innovation Index.org. So tell us.
So once again, 15... another ranking of innovation. So if you think you have a product that is very innovative in terms of intellectual property, etc., you'd want to look at a country where they rank high in innovation, because they will be more receptive to your product than perhaps another country in your listing.
Let's go back to, I have a pet product and I want to sell it in Brazil. So you said the first step would be to go to the chamber or find somebody who can connect you into Brazil.
So you'd want to identify, first of all, first and foremost, what companies in Brazil, the chamber could help you there, or the U.S. Commerce Department could help you to say, okay, who are the key distributors in Brazil for pharmaceutical, veterinary pet products?
Okay.
And they would provide. Now, some of these services have a fee charge, but when you go down there, they will actually set up meetings for you. It's called the Gold Key program. So if you pay a fixed amount of money, they will set up meetings. They usually send a translator along with you to the meeting, and they will walk to the client and help you with your client meetings. So they'll identify potential distributors or clients. They will set up the meetings for you. They will do the translation for you, and they will help you kind of analyze the results of the meeting.
Okay, so I do want to ask a question, because we talk about Illinois, but let's go. I'm going to ask one question about the pet products, and then we'll ask the question about why is Illinois an attractive state for companies to invest in. Well, we better actually get there. So you work with companies looking to invest in the U.S. Why would a company from outside the U.S. want to invest money in the U.S.?
So, great question. The U.S. is still the largest single market in the world. Typically, depending on the category of products, probably represents from 35 to 50% of the global market, even though we only have, if the global market is 7 billion people and the U.S. only has 300 million people or 320 million people, we're less than 5% of the population, but the disposable income here is probably the highest in the world, if not in the top 5 countries. And the U.S., as a result, has the largest, in many cases, the largest physical market, 35 to 50% of any product category. But however, other key factors that are important. Number one, stability. You can predict much more accurately the stability of what's going to happen in the U.S. market. Interest rates, again, are predictable. Inflation, predictable. Labor, predictable. So once you do business outside of the United States, that predictability factor gets a little bit more difficult, and it makes it harder for you to figure out how your business is going to progress. So the U.S. is easily probably one of the more predictable markets in the world. It's not the only market that's predictable, but one of the more predictable markets in the world to base a business on.
So if I had a pet product and I wanted to sell it in Brazil, I could conceivably find somebody in Brazil who might want to invest in me to help grow, my situation. So, I think the dynamic here is that we typically think about selling offshore or people or having connecting, but the idea of people coming in and investing in your business and helping you grow and finding the right relationships there can be interesting. Why is Illinois an attractive state for companies to invest in?
Well, great. I think one has to look at, so historically, Chicago, if Chicago were a country, or I should say if Illinois, the state of Illinois were a country, it would probably be the 18th largest economy in the world. So you're talking about an economy that is probably approaching more than $600 billion a year. So it's a major business. If you were just to come to Chicago alone, it's major business, even if you didn't look at the rest of the United States. Another issue is connectability. So clearly, Chicago O'Hare is one of the easiest airports to connect globally around from any point in the United States. I think those are just two initial factors. Another, depending on the industry, workforce capability is going to be important. Universities, the role of major global universities in Chicago is a critical point. Why? Because it provides talent access for companies looking to hire people. Two, it provides research capabilities for a company that is looking to do research in the United States and is looking for an institution to help it with that research.
So we have a couple minutes left, and I wanted to ask a question that Michael and I were talking about earlier, because we have a lot of tech activity and a lot of invention happening in Chicago, and a lot of times people think the only way they can make money outside the U.S. is to export or to have partners. But you were talking about the option to basically have people license their technology. So why might licensing your rights to the product be a good outside the U.S. plan for a company?
Sure. So licensing is usually used when you have a high technology related product, and there's usually some kind of intellectual property involved, a patent, trademarks, et cetera, et cetera. So with a license, when you export a product into another country, you don't necessarily have full control over how that product is going to be used in another country. Whereas in a license agreement, you can write in kind of the conditions that you want to make sure that product is marketed under in another country. The one issue with the license, though, is some countries, so usually the way you get paid under a license deal is usually via a royalty. And some countries have restrictions on royalty rates. So that may be a difficult way of getting your money back from the country. However, there are other mechanisms such as what we call transfer pricing. That's another whole long discussion, but It's another way to get your money out of the country.
Okay, so a 1 minute question here. There are over, you were saying, 170 countries in the world. If you had to pick one country, which one would you choose?
Well, again, it goes back to what is the potential for your product. The BRIC countries, so the BRIC countries are 4 key countries today: Brazil, Russia, India, China. All are countries with relatively fast-growing economies, large middle classes. These middle classes want new products, whether it's healthcare, consumer products, housing, transportation, vacations, etc. So the BRIC countries are traditionally outside of the United States, markets that are growing faster than the U.S. And have large growing middle classes that make it interesting for consumer healthcare related products. So that would be one area I would look at.
Okay, so connectivity, certainly understanding, is there a market for your product there? Can you find that connect person who you're comfortable with, because there's a high degree of trust here? Michael actually does this for a number of countries, so he's kind of a connector. Now, your company is Rosen Bioscience Strategies.
Correct.
Right, and you specialize in working with companies in the life sciences.
Yes.
I'm going to hit a couple of contact slides here. Once again, these are good resources for you to look at. Just a little bit about SCORE. Why do people come to SCORE? Because they have free counseling, mentoring, either in person, on the phone, or by email. We have an online appointment system, workshops and training, and a small management consulting group. If you do want to contact Twitter, you can contact SCORE Chicago. You can follow us on Twitter. We're at SCORE Chicago. You can check out our YouTube channel. This show will be posted on the YouTube channel in the next 24 hours. So that channel is SCORE Chicago Video. Our website is www.scorechicago. If you want to find SCORE, you can email score@scorechicago.org. Find out about workshops or give us a call at 312-353-7724. I want to thank Michael for being my guest. And we're off the air until next year, when we'll be broadcasting from the new CANTV studios, which we're looking forward to. Special thanks to Amari, Dolores, and the whole CANTV crew for their help this year, and we'll see you next year.